Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand spanking new episode of the StudioMEcast. I'm your host, Peter J. S. Regan. Of course, you already know that by this point. Today, what you might not know is that I have a special guest. I'm kidding, we always have a special guest, but this is an old friend of mine, actually, from my film school days. She is the lead story editor at Menajerie Studios, that's up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and she does many other things, and we're going to be going over a little bit about that, learning about her journey as a filmmaker, and being involved with a studio and some of the cool projects that she's got going on. I'm just looking forward to having a good conversation with my good friend Leah. So without further ado, please welcome Leah to the show. Applause in post. Thanks for joining me today, Leah.
Thanks so much for having me.
How have you been?
Been doing good. Yeah, I feel like things have definitely picked up a bit more post-COVID world, but people are kind of getting back into the swing of things, and so it's definitely been crazy, but a good crazy.
What are the types of projects that you're seeing the most of at Menajerie right now with your clients?
So I think the biggest thing, and whether this is because that's the direction we've really went in or it's just becoming more of a wanted thing, would be brand films. Mm-hmm. And they're essentially like a mini documentary, and they kind of tell the story of a business. And that tends to be our foot in the door with a lot of clients. They start with that. So we gather interviews, we gather footage. And then after their brand film, we have all this footage and interviews and things like that. So sometimes they can become a retainer client where they'll want other things down the line. But the brand film is kind of like this overarching who they are, what their mission is, and kind of, what they do. So yeah, those are always fun.
When they come to you, are they the ones who initiate the idea of we want this to tell our story? Do they say it in those words, or is it you bringing forward that as a powerful element?
I think it depends. There are some people that definitely know what they want, and we kind of try to morph it but stick with what they want. But there are a lot of people that are we just need to get our name out there, or we want to do a whole brand revamp or something like that. And we tend to, in both cases, lead them towards a brand film. Because it's either a really good way to reintroduce yourself or completely change your image. So kind of serves both purposes.
That's fantastic. And it's so, to me, what I'm kind of reading between the lines here is we were in the same film program mm-hmm. that also and a lot of the people you work with mm-hmm. were in the same film program, and mm-hmm. the emphasis on story for that, and how Hanjin made us that wasn't just repeated. Mm-hmm. It was something that he did everything he could to help us understand what that meant. I think that's great that that's coming in through your work, through the present day.
Yeah, definitely. I feel his emphasis on, because I think that he wasn't ever as concerned about the technical side. I feel obviously different professors have the thing that they care the most about. And I do think for him it was always as long as you have a good story, just try to tell it in the best way possible. And that's his main focus. He didn't care what you shot on. He didn't care what you edited on. He's was it a good story? Did I like it? Okay. Then it was a good project.
Absolutely. Especially with the foundation of it. Mm-hmm. As time went on, there were the light and sound courses, right. which blew my mind. Mm-hmm. I never watched movies the same again. Mm-hmm. But it's fun because there's a lot of people who have gone on from that film program to do things mm-hmm. they have a career in their field at many different levels, and you're with studios, I'm with studios, so mm-hmm. it's kind of a cool thing to see how that's it was a successful program, I'd say.
It was well, and even his technical classes, I feel it was all about how light tells a story, how sound can tell a story. You know what I mean? Even his approach to it wasn't just viewed as a means to an end. It was here's how lighting can direct your eye. Here's how sound can make you feel a certain way. So it was he always had story as the backbone of every film element that he taught us, which I feel I carried into today, and realizing every element of film is an opportunity to tell a story and use it in a creative way. So he's good at his job.
Absolutely. And so with that being, would you say that's your foundation as a filmmaker, that program, or did you have something going on before that? I'm trying to...
I definitely was always, made films when I was in middle school with my friends, made films when I was in high school with my friends, and then ironically enough did not go to college for film initially. I actually I was actually at Penn State, Maine initially, and for journalism. And I don't know why. I was like determined that that was the career I was going to do. And then I would find myself outside of class running around making movies, not writing stories. You know, it became very apparent about a year and a half into Penn State that like I wanted to do film and also didn't want to be at Penn State anymore. And so kind of through that found Edinburgh's film program and their emphasis on it being an arts, which is very unique, I feel like, compared to other schools' view of film. And so I think like that foundation of film as an art form, as a thing to do for fun, as a recreation was like always kind of there. It just took me a little bit to pursue it as a career.
That's really, I didn't know that, that you weren't initially a film major, because when I came in, that was already your major, and you were making, one of the things that I remember about you in particular from that program is I feel like you had a higher consistent output of projects that were also consistently at a higher quality than average. No, that's really like, and I've talked to other people in the program about that, how it wasn't just that you made a good film. It was consistently you had a project going on, and it was consistently like, you know, not to you know, cast aspersions on anybody else, but on average, at least your films were above average on as far as like just their production value even. So you have that producer quality to you as well. So we've heard a bit about before film school, how film school like also helped with like that foundation for you as a filmmaker. What's the biggest revelation you've had in media? It can be as a filmmaker or an editor, whatever. What's the biggest revelation that you can think of right now that you've had after film school?
I think I always really liked editing. Like I always found myself headed in that direction. And I think realizing how it's, number one, not most people's favorite part of the process, but also just how much story comes from the editing. I mean, obviously, every role plays such an important part, but it's like, as the editor, taking all of those things and trying to kind of take in everybody's input and trying to kind of like, you know, make sure you're doing what everybody wants, but also make these very like kind of gut instincts about timing and, you know, when to cut to what angle, and just really realizing how much of the story comes out in the editing process, you know, and how much you don't see from what was filmed on the day or what was said, you know. And I think like I always knew editors were important, but I didn't really realize like the power that they hold. You'll never watch reality TV the same way again when you know what you can do with editing, and you're just like, it's all a lie. It's all a lie.
I've seen edits that demonstrate exactly what you're talking about, where from the same pool of footage, they'll give two completely different impressions of a story for a fake reality show, like as an exercise. I forget where I saw it, like somewhere on YouTube, obviously, but where it showed one version where, it's some kind of knockoff of The Bachelor or something, where one guy and girl are like, they're maybe interested in each other in one version, and then in another version with the cuts and the sounds, or like just
they like hate each other.
The inserts where they look bored for a second, like as the other person's talking, just exactly completely switches it up.
If you're ever watching a reality show, there's never any need for more than just one angle of a conversation unless you want to manipulate the conversation. You know what I mean? Like really one camera angle should be filming their conversation, but if there's one and then a two shot where you don't see the other person's head like face, it's all fake. Everything's fake.
Yeah.
You know? So that was really interesting, and I just think the more that I've kind of done it, the more I've appreciated it and found myself trying to look at like other films that I really love and learn more about who the editor was, and finding also, I guess kind of going along with that, that a lot of the big time directors work with like the same editor, like consistently. Like Tarantino worked with Sally Menke up until, like, I think from Reservoir Dogs up until Inglourious Basterds.
What a career.
Right?
Wow.
And I mean, like, winner after winner. And I gotta say, because she passed away, after she passed away, I did not like his films as much. Like, I know it's controversial, but like Django, I
love
Inglourious
Django.
Basterds is better than Django.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree. Just to give Django a little shout out, that's my favorite Tarantino movie. But like
Pulp Fiction fans are gonna come for you.
Well, hang on, no. I have a different categories for like best and favorite. Not to be pretentious, but this is what I think about all day, people. And it's but I just also the experience of going to see Django in the movie theater. I think that was the first time I saw a Tarantino film at the cinema.
Oh, okay.
And it was great year for movies, or hope at least an optimistic one, because The Hobbit was coming out, Les Mis was coming out, Skyfall was coming out, and Django. Just all these.
Epic.
I was so excited for all of these. But the only one that I didn't really know what the story was kind of going to be was Django.
Right.
Because The Hobbit, loved the book, first real book that I read when I was younger. Les Mis, I had the musical memorized since I was 9 or something. And then, and with James Bond, it's even though Skyfall is a little different, James Bond does have a format.
Right.
It's a tried and true, they do something different every once in a while, but you kind of know who's gonna win, more or less, anyway, or who might not die. But with Django, I was just, my mom and sisters weren't too interested in seeing it. But I was also just telling my dad and my brother, let's go see a Western. Come on, just the guys, let's go see a Western. I dragged them. And it was packed. Yeah. It was the most alive. It was like a spectator sport. Yeah. It was so awesome.
That's so nice when you have a viewing experience that is interactive. You go on a super packed day and the audience is right there with it. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I think that Inglourious Basterds was my first Tarantino.
Interesting.
And that's my favorite Tarantino film, which I always find myself defending again to the Pulp Fiction fans.
You don't have to defend that from me. It's a fantastic film.
And speaking of not knowing what's going to happen, talk about thinking you're going to know. And Tarantino was like, nope.
Yep.
This is how he died. I don't know spoilers. But
no spoilers on this show. So you're safe here, everybody.
From this movie from 10 years ago. But yeah, that was it. And her her as an editor, it's funny because you wouldn't think subtlety when you think of Tarantino. But the editing actually is very quiet and perfectly paced. I think the opening to Inglourious Basterds is one of the most perfect examples of suspense editing.
Indisputed. Totally.
And talk about just every decision that she made was exactly right. To the point where you watch it and you're just yeah, that's how it should be. It's so good that you don't even notice kind of thing, which is the other side of editing that's ironic is if you're good at it, people won't notice that you did it because they just subconsciously feel it's right. When you do start to notice the editing, unless it's on purpose, you're something's wrong. If you watch a rom-com and you're why is this cutting every 2 seconds?
Right.
You know what I mean? When the editor becomes known, it's usually kind of a problem.
I'm a bit of an advocate for. I agree with what you've said, but I also occasionally a flary edit, like a smash cut, the punch to the firework, Big Lebowski kind of thing, where you see it's a big show, and I think that's awesome too.
An impactful cut where it wants you to notice.
But that's why you're smart too, because you said unless it's on purpose,
exactly.
So you even know there's exceptions to that kind of thing.
Once you learn the rules, you can break them. Kind of thing.
Absolutely,
and I feel that's what she did super well. So that was definitely a big thing was as I began to appreciate editing more, I went to look up films I really liked, who the editors were, and kind of learn more about them and their style and see if they gave interviews and all that stuff. So
she's been a huge impact on you. Would you say she's the most influential editor for you?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Because I do really like Tarantino films. They're not my absolute inspiration necessarily, but the fact that she was such a consistent and throughout time, their relationship, that she was his right hand man. I mean, he gave her so much credit. He shouted her out all the time. You just don't see that very often. And so I just think that's really sweet. And I like being able to see someone's work evolve. Because, a lot of films that I do really like, the editor wasn't necessarily consistent on other films or something. Whereas she talk about someone who had consistent output, just good after good after good.
Right.
And sticking within the same genre. There's a lot of editors that switch between genres. And so
that's a good point.
What was his name? This guy because I did a video about Sinister, that film being this very scary film. And that editor also did Taken and Promising Young Woman, which talk about 3 completely different genre movies.
Right.
And he did this really interesting podcast. I think it's called the Cinema Podcast. Where
we can have that name up on the screen for y'all watchers out there. I know Leah knows their name, but there's a lot of names to remember.
Yeah,
so.
I feel like it's like I pronounce it wrong too. To be honest.
But you were,
I think it's good. I'm not attempting.
but you were saying that they were on this other podcast,
and they got asked like, do you edit differently based on genre? Because you'd think like, yeah, obviously, but really, he's like, it's all just kind of instinctual, and even if you're doing like emotional editing, like emotion can be comedy, it can be drama, it can be horror. Like you're just trying to elicit an emotion. So his process was the same for all of them. And I think he referred to editors as like the midwife of film, which is one of my favorite things I've ever heard.
I don't think I've heard that one. That's that quite one, good.
We really got to get his name up, so I'm not just co-opting his stuff.
What a hero. Coming up with phrases and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the midwife of film. I think I'd go with that for sure.
You're trying to like, you work with the director hand in hand, and you're trying to like deliver the baby film.
It's interesting how often people like compare their films to children. Like one person was saying, one of the other guests I've had before, they had like 5 scripts, and they're trying to figure out. They said, which child do I give birth to first?
Yeah.
But then also the midwife of film, and it's just an interesting analogy that keeps coming up through. Obviously not exclusive to film, but like it's just something that's. Well,
then there's that one phrase which, like, God, I hope I'm not saying it wrong because it's terrible, but like killing a baby or killing your baby,
killing your children. It's like when you have to cut a scene or something, or remove something from the film you love.
You feel like is so necessary.
Yeah,
you love,
sacrificing your child.
Yes.
Yeah, to the movie god or whatever.
Yeah. So there is definitely a lot of like children analogy within film.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like this could be a larger conversation. But all right, so fantastic. You said that this editor, though, wasn't necessarily Tarantino's editor, wasn't necessarily your absolute inspiration. Do you have an absolute inspiration for any of the work you do?
I tend to, any film where, because again, this is just the type of editing that I appreciate, because I think because I'm a story editor where it isn't like super noticeable. If there's any films, they tend to be like the kind of more quiet, like character-driven, dialogue-driven films. Like to me, I look at it like, everything about a film is contrived, right? Like literally, it's all controlled.
All fake.
It's all fake, and so when you have these like very genuine moments happen in film, to me, that's like the most impressive thing. Like to me, that's like beyond any, CGI or anything like that, because you're literally taking something that is the most contrived thing and eliciting a super genuine moment response. So I tend to like lean towards the films that like have that element to them. But I mean, then on the flip side of that, like 2 of my favorite directors right now that I think are just going to be the next, this isn't going to be surprising to anyone, but Jordan Peele. Talk about like slam dunk after slam dunk, and Taika Waititi, because I think from a director's standpoint, they inspire me because not only are they producing an incredible work, but they're also a delight to work with. And like, I have definitely had a somewhat like change of heart about these directors that are like notoriously awful on set in the name of art. And I'm like, no, film should be fun. I know there can be emotional moments, but like you should not be terrorizing your set in the name of art. And like the fact that Jordan Peele and Taika Waititi are, producing like Jojo Rabbit, talk about a really heavy movie, tone all over the place. He was walking around dressed as Hitler because he was also the director, and him talking about that experience is so sweet. Like everyone just has nothing but wonderful things to say about them. So being both a really good director and a delight to work with on set are people that like I admire personally. Why do I keep bringing up Hitler? It's like the second time.
That's okay. It's pretty clear he's still the bad guy. Like
exactly.
Although that's funny because Taika Waititi, I heard him tell the story of him on set in full Hitler costume, makeup, everything, and there was some crew across a river that was like taking something the wrong way, and he was having to yell at them to direct him, like, no, go this way, come on, like, do it, get over there, and
His
stuff.
hand movement's
And he
getting a little
starts
too-
to like, and it gets to the point like, he's a great storyteller. Look him up in this interview. But it was he kind of realized, oh
He got really
wait,
nervous about
what
being
do I
too, like,
look like?
authoritative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny.
so cute.
It's like if you're. And that's also, I think, true for a lot of the subject matter. It's, on the one hand, it's a tough kind of career. The days can be really long and all that. But also you hear stories of Spielberg on the set of Schindler's List, which is like emotionally devastating for everybody all the time. And he would call Robin Williams and have him on speakerphone to cheer up everybody, that kind of thing. There's another film.
Well, up and coming director Spielberg.
Yeah,
like
shout out to
good. I don't know if you guys
Spielberg.
know
This
him.
guy's gonna be great someday.
Oh my god, when he did West Side Story, did you watch that?
I did.
I loved it. But I felt like I came out of it being like, this Spielberg guy really knows how to make a movie. Like it
He's
felt like
still
obvious
got it.
it was good.
He
like,
has still got it.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I really like the original West Side Story a lot.
Same.
And I think just from watching Spielberg's version, I really felt like he played to the strengths of other aspects of the story in a lot of ways. Like,
he honored it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I feel like he didn't try to surpass the same things that the original movie did so well. I feel like in a lot of ways, like he still nailed those moments for
Right.
sure, but he also, I feel like, tried his best, like focused or pushed on like elevating certain other scenes that had perhaps more potential to be explored.
He like
you know,
recontextualized some of the songs,
yeah.
which I thought was really interesting because he like went to Puerto Rico to kind of get how people there felt about the original and like took their input in and their consideration to literally like recontextualize songs. So like they're still in there, but they're in this like different setting, or they're telling like a different beat of the story or something, which is also super impressive to both honor it and then also change it just enough to like kind of modernize it, you know, with the times and be sensitive and tell like a genuine story and everything.
I
And
always
again, Spielberg really good.
Yeah, I always appreciate his ability to do his research,
Yes,
like especially
yeah.
with historical stuff. Like, look, not every historical, even like the great historical movies, a lot of them have some kind of little thing that's inaccurate about them. But as far as historical filmmakers go, I'm really impressed to see like a lot of the detail that Spielberg puts in his historical stuff that he doesn't have to, right? In a lot of ways, he's made that better.
Right.
You know, before Saving Private Ryan, which still has some inaccuracies in it, like if you're that far underwater, a bullet is not going to hit you, and they're not like arrows. But even other things where I forget the name of this unit at the moment, but when they're on the beach at the beginning and there's a guy yelling at Tom Hanks to move up because the armor's coming in.
Yeah.
There's that guy is fulfilling actually a pretty obscure, less known part of the armed forces that was like in charge of making sure the Navy and the Army were working together to get the beach going. And he's got the right insignia on his helmet and like just stuff like that, where there is a reason why this guy does not outrank Tom Hanks's character, but he has the authority to tell everybody on that beach to haul up, you know, because he's like, this is where the tanks are going, get out of here.
He like knows how to look at a situation and understand what details are important without getting lost in it.
Right.
Because you then run into people who will try to tell too authentic of a story to the point where like it winds up falling flat as a film.
It's like, yeah, at that point,
Just make a documentary.
you still need, exactly, that's
Yeah.
one of the things.
Yeah.
Now let me segue that, because I mean, geez, here we are, look at us.
Anyone want to hear us talk about movies?
No, yeah, it's like, look at us, two old film buddies talking about movies. But I kind of want to stick on editing here because this is something you're really passionate about. You mentioned how the one editor did not let the genre dictate the editing style. Did you find that you were taking cues for your approach on editing based on the project type? Before that, have you implemented this kind of mindset?
I think like, you know, because of what we do where it is like client based, right? That we would like, I would edit a car commercial different than I would a brand film, right? So you talk about, a brand film would lean more into documentary style editing versus like a car commercial is where you have like the very noticeable editing, the swoops and the slides and the wow, because you got 30 seconds to catch someone's attention. So in that case, like there is a different approach to it because you're trying to first and foremost make the client happy, So I think in that way, definitely I'm somewhat dictated by it. But I think with everything that we do, always trying to make an emotional connection is like first and foremost. So even with like a car commercial, I feel like what we try to do differently with car commercials is have like this emotional element with, like we've worked with Bianchi they might be one of our oldest clients. They started with us when we were still working out of like Jess and Nick's kitchen. Like we were like editing the commercial in their kitchen, which I like love them so much because they really took a chance on us. I mean, honestly, and then we've worked with them. We still work with them and they're lovely. They're like the best people and it's always a joy to work with them. And I think through that relationship, they've got more creative with like their commercial ideas. And, you think about it, like you don't have to with a car commercial. You could just sell the car.
Plenty of car commercials are virtually identical.
Right. And theirs stand out because they too see this like relationship that people have formed with both Jason Perico, who's like the kind of face of it, and his dog Max is like this really adorable little wiener dog that is like the feature of every commercial. We keep joking with Jason. We're like, he's taken over the commercials. Like at this point, Max has been 90% of the commercial. Like, is he coming for you, Jason? But like they appreciate that emotional connection that people have formed with it. And so sometimes the commercial has its own story and then it's like, oh, and by the way, the car is also there. Mm-hmm. So you're like kind of reeling people in with the emotional connection and then advertising a car, which, some of the best people out there like Geico talk about. When you think about Geico, that is some of the best like commercial advertising I've ever seen because they make you laugh. They make an emotional impact. The little gecko, super recognizable, the like cavemen, the just random bits that they would do that were like puns. They got real into puns for a while, And you don't think about commercials as being any type of emotional or story, but the best ones I think do focus on that, and that's what makes them stand out. So I think I went off on a tangent, but basically
that was great.
That,
like, I love that tangent.
Yeah, like that you do change up your editing style, but I think the heart of everything is generally like story and making some type of emotional connection.
So you don't have to name names for this. Mm-hmm. In fact, I recommend you don't.
Yes.
Have you ever presented, say, a new draft or deliverable to a client, and it was something that maybe you did a bit extra for it, like, oh, I'm going to put these awesome transitions and whatever, some kind of, like, you're trying to make something, you're putting it, you're next level stuff here. And have you ever done that, and that client came back to you basically with, I want you to tone that down, or to make it less, like they don't necessarily say make it less unique, or less awesome,
right?
But have you ever but like that thing where you've ever done like a little extra and it didn't and you got some pushback from that kind of thing?
For sure.
Why do you think that happens? I
think that like, again, all of our background, because like Greg was in our film class, Jess went to Penn State Film School. Nick, ironically, is the one of us that doesn't have the like film background, but has always, him and Jess made films all their life. So we all kind of come at it from an artistic perspective. And I think we can all encourage each other to be like, oh my God, this looks so good. This is so cool. We're all like hyping each other up. We deliver it to the client and they're like, what? Like they wanted something way more straightforward, or they just don't quite get that there's like artistic choices happening and not just necessarily like the say like I'm trying to say this in like a nice way, like the basic, like when you can have the basic information that needs to get out and then we'll try to tell it in an artistic way. And sometimes they just want the basic, they don't want any distraction from the like main point. And so we've definitely had discussions where we're like okay, but the thing is we'll always put what we think is best out there. And we will never push back when a client wants something changed, though, because at the end of the day, it's their project. So they're, how they want it is how we're going to do it. Now, if they suggest something where we're like, that's not possible, or that is going to bring production value down, we might kind of put that out to them. But ultimately, if they want it, we're going to do that because, client comes first kind of thing.
There's definitely a distinction between a client making an informed request versus maybe they're the person in their company who's been placed with the responsibility of getting this video done.
Right.
They reached out to you. They maybe haven't produced a video before. You know,
Right.
like they're a new client. They're just getting into video now or something. And they might ask, you know, for something that maybe it's not even impossible, but you know enough about what you're doing to kind of get a sense of what they're trying to accomplish, or they've told you what they want to accomplish, and you know, hey, that the juice isn't really worth the squeeze for that. It's not going to do what you think it will. At times, it's you know, especially with a new person who's been really clear of like, I haven't done this before.
Right.
Let me know. Which happens is someone will just be like, look, I don't want this to get messed up. It's my responsibility. This is good. Here's the directions. But if there's something that you think is wrong, let me know.
Right.
And those are really interesting clients to work with, I've found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, for the most part, I can't think of anything where I had to like completely redo something. You know, in general, it's like everybody might have like minor requests or might, you know, want to see something done a little bit differently, or but for the most part, like people are pretty open. They know they're coming to a company for their kind of view and their perspective and to, you know, tell that story. So they generally aren't like, wow, that was completely wrong. Because if they have that specific of requests, they'll usually like state it, you know. So yeah, for the most part, everyone's pretty open, which is nice. So
Are there any types of projects that you're not doing right now, or you maybe don't have the same opportunity at the moment that you'd like? What's something that you'd like to see going forward into the future?
I think I've like kind of looked over the years for an opportunity to tell like my own documentary story that isn't client based, you know, because obviously, again, when you have a client, we've done documentaries, but they're always for a client. And again, in that instance, you're, you know, you can have a lot of creative control, but you still want to make sure you're fulfilling the client's wishes. And so I really want to, you know, tell a story about something that I'm passionate about or care about with like total creative control, just to kind of see what that looks like, you know. And there've been a couple opportunities in the past, but the thing about documentaries is like I can have multiple kind of in the works, but you know, you kind of just see how they evolve. And particularly when they're about a person, there's that fine line between like, you know, if they hit some hard times and they don't want it discussed in the documentary, you kind of put it on the back burner, because I always want the subject matter to feel comfortable, to not feel exploited, to be on board with it. And so, you know, there was one that kind of got put on pause for a while that like I hope gets picked back up again. But I'm also like, you let me know if this is something you want to pursue, and I'll kind of keep other projects going. So that's the thing with documentary is kind of what we were talking about with like reality TV, when you don't want to be reality TV, when you want to tell an honest and truthful documentary story. You're dealing with real people and real situations, and so you have to kind of be ready for variables that you can't control. And so I'm hoping that one of these ideas is able to kind of be followed up on, but I'm also not trying to push it. So in the meantime, kind of pursuing smaller projects, you know. But I definitely understand now why certain documentaries take like 10 years to pursue, because you just grab interviews when you can, and then you're like, okay, well, we'll touch base in 2 years, you know.
Right.
So I have like a couple of those like started that if they come about, awesome, but I never want to like make anyone feel pressured. So
Right.
yeah.
It's an ongoing passion project for you.
You got to have those.
That's great. So something you just mentioned, though, about not having it be exploitative. You don't want it to be like a reality show either, where it's more performative. You want to have those authentic moments, but a lot of the time in our lives, those authentic moments are very private, that we don't want to necessarily share or show to people, even if they're not shameful. It's like it's private, you know. So finding a subject for a documentary, if it is even just a person, could be super difficult.
And making sure you're the right person to tell the story is also the thing. Like, there have been multiple things where I'm like, this is such an interesting thing. And then I'm like, you know what, as my background is who I am, I might not be the right person to tell this. So there's an instance where like, if I can help someone else tell it and pass the mic a little bit and offer support or offer assistance, but allow them to take lead because they'd be a better viewpoint or voice on it, like I'd want to do that, you know? And like I think that's also really important to know as a filmmaker, is like whether or not you should be telling the story even if you really want to, like, you're like, as who I am, as what I know, should I be telling it, or can I help someone else tell it? And that would be my involvement. So that's happened a couple times in the past.
How do you feel that works with the idea of no one person is making a film alone, right? So I think could a way to mitigate perhaps the personal limitations of an artist be one where you surround yourself? This is clearly a leading question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. I think that's super true. And I think like that's kind of what I mean about like I could have an involvement, but maybe I'm not like the head honcho on it. Like maybe I see this story and I find someone else who might be able to kind of like, you know, be the director or be the interviewer. Or like a couple years ago, we produced a film about the refugee population in Erie, because it's actually very fascinating. Like 20% of Erie's population is New American, and we want to tell that story. But we actually had this really awesome artist photographer made them conduct the interviews, because he was able to elicit a much more kind of authentic interview with other New Americans because he's experienced that. So we just filmed it. We kind of allowed them to talk, you know what I mean? So we're still involved in it, but we were like, I think that this might, you know, he would be a better interviewer. So like that kind of thing. We're like,
The results spoke for themselves.
yeah, he asked questions we wouldn't have thought of because we literally don't have that shared experience. So I think sometimes it doesn't mean you can't make it, but maybe it means you take a back seat, or you take a more behind the scenes role, or you take a step back or down, or again, like the idea of passing the mic, where you allow someone else to maybe spearhead it and you provide support if you like really genuinely want a story told but don't feel comfortable being the one to tell it. So I think that's a thing that a lot of filmmakers probably deal with, and a lot, you know, where they're like, I really want this told, but should it be me? And, you know, is there a way for me to allow someone else to tell it? So.
I think that also one thing that I like to bring up, sort of, I think almost a little counter to what you're saying. I think we're on the same side of this, where there is such thing as you can't make this movie happen, you know, like it's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah,
maybe it's like it just shouldn't
and
be.
maybe, and you know what, that sometimes is like, I mean, since even though no one person makes a film, so many things get down to the individuals involved, where like a bad cinematographer can ruin a great director's movie, or vice versa. There's plenty of movies that are shot super well, but the director doesn't know where the focus of the story is.
Crazy blocking, you're like, why?
Right, yeah, or whatever it is. But when it comes, so one of the examples I like to bring up for this kind of thing, as far as experience goes, which is experience can be insanely valuable. And but on the flip side of that, Steven Spielberg's never been in combat, right? So, but he didn't just kind of go, I'm pretty sure I know what it's like,
Right.
you know. And would Steven Spielberg have been able to create a combat scene that's as authentic as he can if he did it earlier in his career? I'm pretty sure he would say no. You know, a lot of that can be, look, maybe you're not the right filmmaker for this yet. Maybe you'd be the right person in 10 years, but if this is a story that needs to be told now, that's, you know, I think there's a lot of balancing acts. So I think that as I sometimes disagree a little bit with the guest here.
That's okay.
But
I got
yeah.
a counter for you.
Okay, cool. So, but yeah, I was gonna say, I think that what you're saying can absolutely be a reason that like disqualifies or makes it so that a certain filmmaker just isn't the right one to do it. And that can largely be they don't have the experience for this. Like they don't know, or even reduce that to they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
You know, but I think that at the very least, I think sometimes it's worth like, hey, do your research on the particular topic, on the people that you like that the film's about, for sure. But anyway, so that's sort of more my side of looking at it, which is I think you're right some of the time, but I think another way that can help with that is research, consultation, having more people involved, for sure. Because also filmmaking is its own skill set. You know, there's some people who like anything, like music. All right, you might be an actual like someone who's killed people, who's like had a rough time in jail, but that doesn't mean that you're able to sing about it very well. So, but you said you got a counter. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's also like, let's say something you did experience firsthand, and because you experienced it firsthand, it's really triggering to tell that story. So I think you also can have that where like, I don't think you have to have that like deeply emotional connection to tell that story. And I don't even necessarily mean like you can't be the director on it. It might be that you make sure that the lead writer on the script is someone who has had that experience, and not just pulling someone in after the script's already written to go, hey, can you double check that like the women lines make sense for a woman? Which I'm going to tell you happens a lot. And the thing is, like, you can have a really great film, but like how interesting would it have been if it was directed by someone that was in combat? I don't know. I can't tell you.
Platoon was.
Yeah, I mean, and like for instance, like Jordan Peele, this very up and coming director, passed the mic to this like young black woman to direct Candyman, who it was her first time film, to have this very established director go. He could have made that film and been like, can you produce it or can you be a writer on it? But he wanted her to take the lead on it. You see his influence a lot on Candyman, the like remake from a couple years ago or 2 years ago. It's like relatively recent.
Relatively, yeah. It's a remake.
You definitely see his influence. You can tell it's a Jordan Peele produced film, but it is different. It's a different voice telling it. It was really cool. And so if he would have directed it, it would have been a different film, and I wouldn't have got to see this woman's work. And now she gets to go on and have that experience because someone let her take the lead. And so there's also like that kind of importance of being like, he could have told that story for sure. Like he's such a good director, but he wanted to allow someone else to have their spin on it. And if she hadn't been the director, she wouldn't have really, had as much say. So I think, it's not so much a thing of like whether or not you're allowed to, because I can't tell someone whether or not they're allowed to tell a story. They'll have to know that. But something to be said for if there's someone more right to do it, but you want to just be involved, allowing them to take more of, the lead on it to see what they could produce. Because like even with the documentary we made, like, we're all very good at interviewing. I think we could have produced a decent, documentary that would have fulfilled its things, but Matham brought this, different side to it that we never could have got there, no matter how talented we are at filmmaking, because we didn't have the lived experience, So there's always that kind of balancing act. And again, I'm not here to tell someone whether or not they're allowed to tell a story. Like, that's totally their call. But I do think it's like an interesting thing, particularly in Hollywood, where people want to be the lead. They want to be in charge. And sometimes a better film can be made by taking a step back. But that's a difficult thing to do as a creative. So it's a definite balancing act. And then going back to the point of like, if you're too tied to a film, sometimes that can be a problem. Like the subject matter is too personal, so you can't separate, So it's definitely like, there's not any set way to make a movie. You'll never know what movie didn't get made or could have been made. All you have is what you wound up with. So
I think that's a really a very thoughtful way of breaking that down, especially what you said about if you are too attached to something, which also kind of complements the idea of maybe right now you're not the filmmaker for that, but after that person has worked through that trauma and gotten to process it a bit more, then maybe it becomes time for them to tell that story. So that's a pretty cool thing. Yeah. Awesome.
It's all stuff I feel like people are always thinking about in the creative process.
I love talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's the best. Yeah. Fantastic. So we've got you've got your passion projects going on. You've your Menajerie Studio, and it seems like film is notoriously difficult to get a career in because there's so many people who want to do it, and like on pretty much any level,
right?
Right.
Across the board, yeah.
So you are in, from where I can tell, a really great place. Congratulations. I'm very happy for you. For someone who, like, okay, so a lot of the people who come to this studio, some of them are, way ahead, amazing professional, all that stuff. And sometimes they're just first-time filmmakers.
Sure.
Honestly, I want to shout out the first-time filmmakers out there.
Good job, guys.
Yeah. But Leah, for someone who's looking to progress as a filmmaker, or even just like kind of get to a point where they can say like they officially started their career because they haven't gotten a paycheck on a gig yet or whatever.
Right.
What's a bit of, is there any knowledge or advice or something like that that has been consistently helpful to you? Like, is there any kind of, if a young filmmaker's like, hey, do you have any advice for me? What do you say?
I think it's really important, and it's okay if it takes a little bit, but to figure out, like, what is it when you really break it down? What do you like to do every day with filmmaking? I don't know what that means to each person. Everyone has something different. Again, I think when I realized that I just like editing, I really don't care what it is. Like, I will find a way to make it interesting. I mean, there are some projects that you can't make interesting, but for the most part, like, I really just enjoy the process. I look at it like putting a puzzle together. It's very satisfying. I'm a little OCD, so editing right in there. That's what I like to do every day, and I really don't care, what it is. I approach kind of like that editor I was talking about, everything in the same way, whether it's a documentary, a brand film, a commercial, anything. I have the way you're just putting a puzzle together. And so I think if you're a young filmmaker, zeroing in on what you like to do and finding a way to do that, regardless of what it sounds like, regardless of what it looks like to anybody else. If you just want to be a part of a company that you've admired for years and you don't care what you're doing, you just want to be a part of it, do that. But if you really want to do a specific thing, finding a way to do that regardless of what it is, whether it is, being an editor on a narrative film, editing, like commercials, teaming up with people because you just really like filmmaking and you don't even care if you're making money from it. That's what you want to do with your free time, and you work a side job and you make that happen. Like, I think all of it is important and is just as admirable. I think as long as you're doing what you like to do every day as much as you possibly can, I think you've succeeded. And I don't think you need a paycheck to be validated for it. Like, I think people who maybe never make a cent from their films but just have to make films are just as valid, And so I think that's a big thing, is just figuring out what you like to do and try to zero in on that and do that every day, And that can be different for so many people. When I first left Edinburgh, I didn't know which direction I was going to head in. I did like 3 different elements of film at once. Like, I pretty much immediately started kind of working with Menajerie, but they were a startup at the time. We were we're still technically a startup because we've been in business like 9 years, so still in that startup realm. But I mean, again, we were operating out of their kitchen. Like, I didn't know. It felt very risky. I wasn't sure, but I was editing for them. And then I remember that summer I went out to California and helped a friend on like the film festival side of things. So helping other filmmakers get their film seen. And then I immediately came back from that and worked as a PA on a set that was being, filmed in Erie, being, like a production assistant. So they'd be like, we need 250 mics tomorrow. And also, can you pick up people from the Buffalo airport, the Pittsburgh airport, the Cleveland airport today? So, and I was like realizing what I didn't want to do pretty quickly. And even though some of these gigs had a little bit more, were a little bit more of a sure thing, or I could see a future in, I found myself coming back to like the little editing jobs I was doing for Menajerie. And I was like, that's what I enjoyed doing. So that's what I'm going to take a risk on. And I'm going to help build this company with them and grow from there. So that was kind of how it helped me make a decision, was what I like to do every day. So, yeah.
Well, that's good advice, I'd say. It's also interesting when I think if you only end up wearing one hat in filmmaking, my observation is when there's someone who's only ever held one position, it's usually because they weren't even necessarily going for that thing.
Sure, yeah.
It's like someone, hey, do you want to do this over the weekend? And then that became their career,
That's what we become like known for.
Yeah, because so many people, it's like, you want to be an editor? Well, you got to have footage. And so they go shoot something, or a lot of people, I think most people get into filmmaking with at least thinking they want to direct. but then they eventually find out, ooh, I don't like production or post-production. I just want to write.
Yeah.
And so figuring out what you want to do is definitely a big, great bit of advice for all that, for sure.
And I think it does help to dabble a little bit in everything. That's why I was like, it's okay if it takes a little bit to figure out what you like to do, because I think it also gives you appreciation for the process. Like, even going back to film school where we were like doing everything, you would write the script. I mean, most people anyway, because it was a smaller film school, you would like write the script, cast it, direct it, location scout, do the post-production. For me, it was like all of that front end just to get to the part I really liked, which was editing. And I would even see from my script to the editing how much had changed in the editing process. And like, so I really learned about the flow of everything. So now I really appreciate each step that leads up to the part that I really like, because I had to do all those, So I think that can inform you in whatever position that you're in, if you have an appreciation for the other skills going on.
Absolutely. It's like, even just if you've ever done any acting.
Oh,
I kept
getting cast in things when we were at Edinburgh.
Yeah, right. I know,
There's
you
so
were
many
in
videos
so much
out there on
stuff.
YouTube of me getting like killed or waking up late to something.
I thought that was something you liked to do.
No.
Really? How are you in everything?
I don't know how to say no.
You're like,
I'm trying to. I was talking about this with
you were in so many of the student films.
like, not good. It wasn't like I was some standout like actor.
I thought that was something you were going for at the time.
Absolutely
That's so
not.
funny.
I just wanted to be helpful and
wow.
Yeah, I was talking about that, I think, with like Nikki Kaszewski a couple of weeks ago. I was
Love
saying,
Nikki.
yeah, we were talking about, because I was in one
Still
of her films.
work with Nikki. Yep.
I was in a film where I get murdered by Chris and Max. Like, that's how it ends. I get murdered. Zach had me in a film where I get murdered. I remember I was in a film where, oh my God, Connor was my boyfriend who was into, it was like Garrett. I don't know if you remember this film, but he was into like satanic rituals. And so Connor was getting pulled back into the world of satanic rituals. It was Jen's. I love Jen. It was such a fun film to be a part of, but it was just, once again, I get sacrificed and murdered at the end of the film. And
we ought to make a supercut.
There's so many of me, and me just like waking up suddenly from an alarm. There's like a montage of that. I was in a Ben film where Ben and I think, oh no, it wasn't Ben's film. It was Kelly's film. Ben was just in it. And I'm apparently dating him and Connor, and I'm just like two-timing that. So I was either dying, I was a slut, or I was waking up late. I got very typecast.
So I wasn't involved with most of the...
I forget.
We didn't work together that much.
Right.
But so my impression, I thought like you were pursuing acting and were having a hand in these roles and just liked doing this kind of thing.
I did not think I was good at it. I mean, I would try my best for everybody, because I wanted them to be successful. But nope.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that.
I appreciate that people kept trying to give me a chance. I was actually in Greg's films, and I forgot about that. Like, I work with Greg now, and I literally forgot that I was in. He did this like Chip Daniels series where I was
I love Chip Daniels.
Police.
I remember that. Yeah, Chris.
I was like a police general, or what's the word for it? Like
Chief.
There we go. Police general. And I remember I just put a vest on. And Hanjin being like, I gotta tell you, Leah, you're not selling it. And I'm like, Hanjin, I know, okay? I understand. I'm not trying to sell it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I'm like, the vest didn't help. I'm not authoritative. So, yeah.
That's funny. I think just to, sort of start to wrap us up here, I want to bring it back also to what you said about, like, with documentary, trying to, like, the story and what we said before about it not being exploitative, but then also kind of connecting that same idea to the filmmakers that sometimes you hear about who aren't super nice to the people they work with, to put it mildly.
Like, it was worth it.
Was it? But I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how to improve the process of the experience of making films for people. Like there's, of course, I mean, there's the standards like feed everybody, pay everybody, be nice,
So
I
like
guess.
bare
But like,
minimum, like
yeah, but
suit
right,
kind of things.
exactly.
Yeah.
But so much about filmmaking is oriented toward the like how the movie ends up, and that's the reason everybody's there. It's vital, and you make sacrifices for that. Sure, like time and money, for example, or you invest things into it. And there is the romantic side of blood, sweat, and tears, and all that, which is guaranteed to happen, I guess. But also just the idea of bringing all this full circle. Look at this. Going back to Django. Okay, there's a scene in this. So, all right, if you haven't seen Django, people, but you know anything about this movie, I would say that I'm going to talk about a scene that's in it. Sort of a spoiler, but it's also one of those things where if you know anything about the movie and the time it's set in, you can kind of, if you've seen the trailer, this is part of it.
It's also like 10-year-old.
Yeah,
like
right.
They can go watch it.
No, I don't. No. I'm totally. It's a time-based media. I don't care if the movie is literally 100 years old. If you spoil it for me, I'm not gonna talk to you again.
I won't tell you how Sixth Sense ends.
Thank you. Yeah, that was spoiled for me, by the way. Yeah, see, we're like, oh, it's been out for a while. It's like, yeah, I've been watching other movies, and I have a job, and. I'm like, what? I haven't seen all the movies you've seen.
I did keep getting Stranger Things spoiled for me, and it had been out a day.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on.
Online, like, what are people thinking? They're like, oh, I'm so sad. Here's a picture of the character. I'm like well, now I know they're dead. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like, why didn't say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, well, Django. Here we go. There's a scene in that where it's a slave being flogged. All right, and when they were filming that scene. They were doing that in a historical location where it was amongst the old slave quarters, and this is where that really would happen. And it's like when you're filming a scene, kind of like we were saying with Schindler's List or any other like heavy material and all that, there's that aspect of just the production and everybody you're working with, even, and yourself, to just be mindful of where everybody's at and having, I believe, a respect for the material that you're working with. Because even though Django's like a fun, awesome movie and stuff, there are very serious, heavy aspects to it, and which are also very truthful. And it's like, if I'm not saying you could never do this, but I feel like Tarantino would probably feel like it wasn't the right way of doing it if between takes everybody's like, oh yeah, whatever, let's do this, that, the other thing, live and live, okay, and make sure it looks like it hurts, action, but instead he said everybody just felt the weight and presence of the space they were in, what was happening. A woman started to testify. People were like singing, and as they were doing this scene, and I think that there is this belief that a lot of people. One of the main reasons why people say like you got to be a jerk in order to lead or whatever is some people think that's the case. In order to get good results, they say, well, he's a great filmmaker and he's a jerk about it. So but there's a lot of ways to lead, and there's a lot of ways to collaborate. And if you think that you have to be a prick to the people you work with all the time in order to make a good movie, then I'd say watch that scene in Django and tell me it doesn't work.
Right. Well, that's it. And it's like, okay, maybe you're a good director then because you got the result. But a great director can get a good result and have comfortable communicative sets. You know what I mean? Like,
or even if it's beyond directing at that point, because it's like you can make like incredible things without being a good person. It's like, one of my favorite painters, Caravaggio, is basically a Renaissance rock star where like he'd get up, he'd paint, he'd go to the bar, get into fights, 1 or 2 times like killed a guy, go to sleep, wake up, paint. The guy was just a violent man. His paintings are incredible.
Yeah.
Would I want to
be around it?
There are things to like, okay, this is a media based podcast and all that, but there are other things to life. And it's like maybe being a great director versus being a good person.
Right.
You shouldn't be trying to weigh those.
I feel like there's been a recent resurgence or debate about the idea of like method acting. Like there's a lot of actors that are like, you know, unnecessary because we're actors, we're paid to pretend. So you don't need, like, there's like, that's a whole discussion amongst actors.
Yeah.
I can't really speak on it because, again, for as much as my extensive acting career was,
well, there's a friend of mine, good friend of mine, who's an actor who I'm sure I'll have on this show, who you know is Connor McNellis. And he's talked about this kind of thing before where depending on the scene and the situation and all that, he says there are times where it's irresponsible to draw on real emotions
like
for
your mental
difficult
health is not
scenes.
worth the final product.
And there's also you're interacting with other people there,
yeah.
and then you also have to be able to perform throughout the day for different roles. And if you're like constantly like, you know, getting yourself really to that spot, there can be negative repercussions for that.
Or like, I don't know if you've ever seen the making of The Exorcist. If you've ever like looked into that film, like
I know a bit about it,
a little
but
bit, you know, beyond just like there's all that like superstition.
oh, like
about it.
were people getting actually hurt
Well,
doing it?
that happening, but you know, which is like a whole other topic of like,
yeah, safety,
you know,
right.
But like he would do things like keep the set like 50 degrees and shoot guns off randomly to keep people on edge. And I'm like, sir, they're actors. You can go ahead and trust that they'll get to that emotion without you shooting off firearms to keep people on it. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Where is The Exorcist a fantastic film? Obviously. I mean, like, classic. Did it need to be done the way it was? Maybe not. Again, I can't really speak on it because all we have is the great film that came out of it. You know, so, but I will say, I think that's why I admire directors who can do both. Who can produce a great film, and then I hear that they were a joy to be on set with, even with, like, heavy material, that, like, people felt comfortable, that they were communicative, that they made a safe environment to film tough things, like, and produced a great result. To me, that's just, like, amazing, because it is difficult to keep your cool. And as the director, you are setting the tone for the set, you know, and that's a big job, and you have to come in setting that energy for everyone. So if you're having a bad day, like, if you let that seep in, that's going to be the mood for the day. So it's not that I think it's an easy thing to do. I think that's why I was saying that's who I view as like the great directors, are the ones that do both. When I hear a film was like a nightmare to work on, but a great film, I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
Yep. You yell around like, all right, that's your style, but you know, maybe it could have been a little more enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah. And even just to wrap up a little bit more with this, it's so hard to stop talking to you because but
everyone can go home.
Yeah,
We're
no.
going to talk about film for another 2 hours.
One thing, it's like, yeah, I think there's just that, like, because sometimes things are uncomfortable, but it has to be at, like, with the understanding and, like, consent of the governed, so to speak.
Yes.
It's like Oprah Winfrey on The Color Purple. She was talking about she was constantly terrified, not from anything that Steven Spielberg was doing when he was directing it, but she wanted to be in that movie more than anything else in her life.
Yeah.
And after they were all done with it, Spielberg said to her, I know you were scared.
Yeah.
Or I know you were afraid, but your fear was working for you, so I let you stay afraid.
He like trusted the process.
Yeah, it's like he saw that,
But
you know.
he wasn't like shooting guns off near to fear her.
No,
like, yeah,
no,
exactly.
he wasn't doing that
He
to
was
like.
letting her do her thing.
Yeah, and but he understood, like, you know, is it ideal for someone to like be like, oh man, they're gonna fire me or whatever, like be scared of losing it? It's like in some ways not, but Oprah's performance speaks for itself. Her
Right.
experience speaks for itself. The way that she speaks about the entire project, working with Steven Spielberg and all that, you know, and I think that's because, you know, throughout his entire career, Steven Spielberg has been considered a good guy.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, he's
know.
such a perfect example of, I mean, he produces great work, and I very rarely hear any, you know, versus other directors who are notorious for shooting people going down the stairs 35 times.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Get people who are okay with, if you want to work in an unconventional way,
Sure.
love ours too, but it's a good idea to work with people who you're not holding them hostage
Right.
for their career.
Right.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, well, this has been awesome talking
Yeah.
to you, Leah. I'm so glad it's been so long since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
been great to reconnect. We've known each other almost 10 years now. That's crazy. I'm really glad that things are going well for you in Menajerie Studio. Thanks for coming. Like, you were already into town, but thanks for stopping by and taking some time to do this with me. So, is there anything else you'd like to, leave us? Oh, how can people follow you or like get to know about Menajerie Studio? Like, whatever you want to plug, go ahead.
So I mean, if you're interested, if you're ever in the Erie area, we always welcome people to, stop by, check out the studio. We're located in Little Italy. It's like this big warehouse building that we've converted into like our editing bay and a studio space that we film things in. You can look us up online, menajeriestudio.com, also on Instagram, same name. But yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out if you want your story told.
Thank you. Fantastic. And we'll have those links in the description for y'all below. And we hope to see you all back again for another episode of this podcast. And thanks for sticking around with us. I hope you enjoyed it. And have a good rest of your afternoon. Cheers.